G'day mates, it's the Doctor here, and this is my top 10 episodes from the Andrew Brenner era of Thomas & Friends. Andrew Brenner and his writers have received a ton of praise from the community after season 16, which many would consider as the dark age of Thomas & Friends. With more organically written stories, characters going back to their original personalities, and the return of fan-favourite characters. Brenner and his team worked on the show from season 17 to 23, giving us plenty of memorable moments, and some have argued the stories in these seasons compete with the classic era of Thomas the Tank Engine, or at least some of them. So in honor of the Brenner era, let's go over my personal top 10 best episodes in this generation of the franchise. Number 10. The fastest red engine on Sodor. What has the CGI series been missing? Crashes. What do many fans like about the model era? Crashes. How do we fix this problem with the current series? Crashes. Up until this point, there hasn't been a lot, if any, intense crashes with the show, but the fastest red engine on Sodor was a great episode for its build-up, having a runaway train, the crash itself, and the return of Rosy. Rosy was always seen as the engine that looked up to Thomas, but here it shows Rosy can stand on her own without being around Thomas. Also, while plenty of fans may be upset with the following episode as shed for Edward, this is one of the few times where we see a continuation, where one episode will lead into another. Number 9. Confusion without delay. Yes, I'm including an episode from Big World Big Adventures, because Rebecca is one of the funniest characters introduced to the show, how she misinterprets the situations and interacts with the other characters. And I still laugh every time I hear, "Yeah, of course, confusion, confusion, and, I don't really have much else to say about Confusion Without Delay other than it's a really charming episode. It's also one of the very few times where we see Flying Scotsman on screen. Come to think of it, why haven't we seen more Flying Scotsman? Oh well, Confusion Without Delay is one of the few times we see him, so it gets bonus points. Number 8. Rosy is Red. Of all the episodes on this list, I believe this one has the best moral delivered. Why? Because it teaches kids, and adults too, you can have a friendly relationship with someone of the opposite gender without falling in love or intentions to get married. It's a shame because as kids we like to tease boys liking girls or girls liking boys, similar to Bill and Ben here. But in the adult world, a lot of people believe they have the urge to get kinky with someone. But I can say this to you right now, you don't need it. Just be friends. Thomas wants to be friends with Rosy and there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, there may be episodes with better messages like teamwork or don't make a fool of yourself, but Rosy is Red is something I haven't seen before and I always appreciate something unique, especially when it's done this well. Speaking of... Number 7. PA problems. Edward has had his fair share of bad episodes. Some of them depict him with a completely different personality from what he is known for. Old Reliable Edward, while a great return to form for the character, was a story we have seen before. Gordon looking down on Edward and getting stuck on a hill. PA Problems, however, was a unique story we haven't seen in the show, with the Fat Controller trying to modernize the railways with a new speaker system, but doesn't go quite so well in his favour. Unlike the Miller era where we had characters acting stupid for the sake of having a story, I think this is a believable issue the Fat Controller could find himself into. You gotta remember he's a businessman, and what's his business? Running the railways on Sodor. So I can see the Fat Controller trying out new things to attract visitors to the island. But back to Edward. Fans have been extremely divided on his voices from the UK versus the US, but I gotta say, hearing William Hope as Edward is one of the best casting choices in the CGI series. Feel free to disagree with me on that, but I love the US voice for Edward. And this line towards the end was executed perfectly.
Just because they're old doesn't mean they're not useful.
Sometimes the newest tech isn't always correct. Number 6. Unscheduled stops and free the roads. I'm putting these two episodes together because they do work off of each other quite well. But you might be asking, Doctor, why didn't you do the same for number 10? Well, the follow-up to Fastest Red Engine on Sodor was A Shed for Edward. However, whereas that episode was a little questionable, both of these episodes left me satisfied, and they are enjoyable to watch on their own or back to back. Yes, I wish we saw either Duck or Oliver interacting with Bulgy and not Thomas, but Bulgy was portrayed perfectly. I was surprised out of my mind when I saw Bulgy return, mostly because I was lucky enough to not be spoiled by the internet, unlike Daisy or Big Mickey. He also has a terrific villainous voice, unlike a certain other character that has been severely downgraded. One small detail I noticed is that Bulgy doesn't apologize to Thomas by the end of Free the Roads, so he still has a disdain for the railways. And maybe we can expect another good episode of Bulgy? Maybe one where we focus on Duck and Oliver? Actually, what would be really clever is we find out who is this friend of Bulgy's that Oliver mentions in Season 3. Now that is an idea worth exploring. Number 5. Heart of Gold. Hands down, best Toby episode in the CGI series. It's not often we see humans as the villains in Thomas the Tank Engine. Sure, they're very simplistic villains, but still a nasty little bunch trying to steal King Godred's crown. Which is where Toby of all characters must take action to save the crown the thieves are attempting to steal. It's an action-packed episode where the thieves are sly but clumsy, and Toby is the one that must stop them. Some people say Toby got the Henry treatment where he became more wimpy, so why not call this the redemption episode for Toby? It's also one of the few times where Thomas doesn't appear in the story, which is always a highlight because that allows other characters to shine, like Glyn, Millie, Toby, and Diesel, who wasn't that bad in the episode. In fact, I love this response Diesel gives at the end.
You should never judge a book by its cover.
I've never read a book in my life.
Oh, and what was that line from Edward earlier?
Just because they're old doesn't mean they're not useful.
Number 4. Hunt the Truck. Now this I consider to be a classic era episode. Edward has always had some kind of relationship with Bill and Ben, usually keeping the twins in order like a parent or teacher, but we've never seen a story that delves into that relationship. Hunt the Truck, however, is that episode. It's great to see Edward play a trick on Bill and Ben, not only humiliating them, but without causing confusion and delay. He was able to pay them back and get the job done on time. What a legend! Also, the dream sequence wasn't that bad at all. I know that's a weird thing to praise for something like this, but it was actually tolerable to watch, unlike many of the other dream sequences in Big World Big Adventures. Number 3. Henry in the Dark. Oh yes, you knew this one had to be on here. For whatever reason, the CGI series felt that Henry needed to be the wimpiest engine in the series. And for a while, even when Andrew Brenner took over, Henry still had that whiny persona. This is not the same character from the Railway series. For such boastful engines, can you really see this character be part of a trio of the big engines at Titmuth? Not exactly. But at long last, we have a Henry episode where he takes no nonsense from anyone. This is a character that stands for himself. He actually wants to pay them back for making fun of him. Don't mess with Henry from now on. You wouldn't like him when he's angry. Number 2. No more Mr. Nice Engine. Diesel has not been Diesel throughout the CGI series. Nowadays he is depicted as a teaser or a school bully rather than a devious, slimy character from, again, the Railway series. But No More Mr. Nice Engine, in my opinion, is the closest to classic era Diesel. What also helps is for seasons 17 and 18, Diesel was voiced by Martin Sherman in the US, and unlike his UK voice, at least he sounds like a villain. But it's also about Hero, who we don't get to see often. In fact, for a brief moment, Diesel was able to make Hero go against his morals, believing he should be respectful to the trucks. Diesel nearly got away with making the master of the railway see his way. That is devious. The last thing I'll mention about this episode is the sound effects. As I was getting back into Thomas and Friends in 2013, I noticed the sound design of the CGI series with this particular episode. It sounds very industrial and realistic. It gives the engines more weight, adding to that realistic appearance despite being animated. And my number 1 favorite episode of the Andrew Brenner era is Too Many Fire Engines. This one might seem a little weird because it doesn't have the best story and it doesn't feature any of my favorite characters, so why does this episode stand out to me more than any other? This moment right here.
Fires are emergencies, Flynn. You know that.
That line of dialogue shows Brenner himself is mocking Miller's awful work on how she treated the characters for 4 seasons. And wouldn't you know, the first episode to introduce Flynn was written by Miller, and Too Many Fire Engines was written by the man himself. This is the moment when the show was finally heading down the right path. The characters started speaking more organically and became more self-aware of their situations. But I digress. Just seeing a more talented writer poking fun at an inferior writer is something I greatly appreciate, and that is why Too Many Fire Engines stand out to me more than any other episode in the Andrew Brenner era. And that will do for this video, and I encourage all of you watching to make your own top 10 Andrew Brenner episodes. Because we likely would have abandoned Thomas and Friends if the Miller era continued to this day, and the franchise may have disappeared without a community to support it. So I want to give a huge thank you to Andrew for these episodes, and I hope your career continues to go well into the future. But as much as Andrew Brenner did right for season 17 to 23, there were still plenty of stinkers, so join me next week for the top 10 worst episodes of the Andrew Brenner era, and until then, take care, mates.